now rights activist and member of the organizing committee and bad governance movement in Lagos State, Taiwo Hassan Soweto, joins us live in our studios to discuss further on this. Thank you so much, sir, for coming around.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So the NLC is demanding an increase to the minimum wage, 70,000 naira. But then let's look at it realistically. Is the real issue simply about just raising the wages, or should the focus be on reviewing the economic policies that have driven up the cost of living crisis?
I think the answer to that is very clear. If inflation is going up, the prices of goods and services, including food, is going up, then it should mean that workers' wage also should go up. So from that point of view, I think that Labour's decision to begin a renegotiation for a new wage is quite the right step to take, and it's not supported by the vast majority of the Nigerian working class. Because we have seen over the past 3 years, for instance, members of the capitalist ruling elite, politicians in power, continue to draw huge salaries and emoluments. President Tinubu himself, bought for himself just about a year ago a private presidential jet, costing over $100 million. That is in an economy that is that the government says is bleeding, and people need to cut their coat according to their size. So workers cannot be the only people, who continues to cut their coat to their size, who continues to bear, months of hunger and hardship. And I think that the demands of the NS and the TUC for a new minimum wage is quite the right step to take.
Well, but then when you look at it, the minimum wage from 33,000 naira to 70 naira changed, but the economic policies are still there. So which means that both domestic and external factors will continue to influence either inflation or Nigeria's economics, whichever way we choose to look at it. So are you saying that you are okay with the way the policies of government have gone on in the last 3 going down to 4 years, or probably there's a need to re-engineer it?
Obviously, I'm not okay. We've been on the street at the barricades over the past 3 years, protesting against the neoliberal economic policies of the government, which is causing all of this crisis of inflation and all of that. But I think that the demands of the NS and TUC, what it indicates is that if this government decides to continue to implement policies that will continue to make life harder for the people, then such a government must also be prepared to provide higher wages for workers. If the government is worried about the demand for higher wages by workers, then what the government should simply do is to reverse these criminal economic policies. I mean, if fuel subsidy is restored, and that leads to a situation where the economy becomes more buoyant and inflation comes down, then it would make sense, that wages does not have to go up as much as 500,000 before Nigerian workers can be able to have some dignity, in their lives. But if government does not do that, then there's no other way to go about it than for workers and for other segments of society to continue to clamor for higher wages at all levels.
But the president, that is President Tinubu, has defended his policies, and he has urged Nigerians to be patient. So some people will say that if Nigerians could endure the hardship for years under the previous administration up until now, why shouldn't they remain patient? I mean, especially now that the government is saying that its economy, its economic policies is bringing about a recovery.
I mean, we've been hearing this story about patience, about it's only going to take, a few, years of hardship for things to get better. We have been hearing this, since, for decades now. I've been hearing this, for instance, since I was born, and I'm sure that those who are older than us have been hearing it for the past 60 or possibly even more than that. These are just fairy tales. We cannot continue to believe in those tales anymore. What is obvious, what has been made obvious over the past few years, is that the capitalist government in power, the capitalist political parties in power, do not have the answers to Nigeria's economic problems. They do not have the answers also to Nigeria's social problems. And why don't they have the answers? Because the philosophy that underpins their government is capitalism. It's based on the market. It's about introducing policies of privatization, of removal of fuel subsidy, and all of that, all of which makes the problem even much more messier. The solution to Nigeria's economic crisis is actually for the commanding heights of the economy to be placed under public control and the democratic workers' management. If you have such a policy implemented in this country, It will mean, for instance, that the oil sector, which is going to enrich, which is enriching a few people like a Dangote and Co., will enrich the entirety of the country. It will mean that fuel products, petroleum and Co., will be accessible and affordable by Nigerians. It will also mean that the revenue that comes from the oil sector and other sectors that are, that are very important to the Nigerian economy would actually go into providing, the needed public infrastructures to fund public education and all of that. Well, it is the absence of this kind of policy and this kind of program that has led to the current quagmire that we are in. So my last point will be that if we actually want to solve Nigeria's problem, patience is not what we require. What we require is a socialist economic policy. And that is the only way that Nigeria's problems can begin to go away.
Okay, so if the government agrees to even increase the minimum wage, is such an increase realistic, given Nigeria's weak fiscal position?
Why is it not?
I mean, the government has continued to borrow. We are talking about over almost, 160 trillion in debts, and the financial pressures are there.
The financial pressures are not real because the debts that we're talking about, the loans were obtained to finance public infrastructures. But where are the public infrastructure that those loans have actually financed? Most of these loans actually have been financing corruption. And at the same time, we must also forget the fact that over the past 3 years, Nigeria's revenue has actually increased. And that is why state, local government, and the federal government now are actually sharing bigger portion, of money as national revenue. But when you look at the situation in different states across the country, which has been getting even larger share of the national revenue, you can't point to anything happening in terms of public infrastructures and all of that. Most of the states that are contending with security today have security votes running into tens of billions of naira, which are not being utilized to do anything. If you look at what is happening in Osun State today, ahead of the next elections, you can see that there's enough resources for politicians to share out to prospective voters, for politicians to use to mobilize thugs, for politicians, to use for all kinds of things that do not benefit the people. But when it comes to things that benefit the people in terms of education, in terms of health care, they say they do not have resources. And that is why we must not allow ourselves to be deceived with these kinds of ideas. The truth is that Nigeria is immeasurably wealthy, is so wealthy and adequately wealthy to be able to provide the solutions to all of our problems. Why we're in this state is because we have a capitalist government that is only interested in using the wealth of the country to service the profit of a few. And that is what we need to end. When it comes to paying workers, what we must not lose sight of is that workers are the ones producing the wealth of this country. So workers have a right to demand a higher pay. By demanding a higher pay, workers are simply demanding that the fruit of their labor, that they should earn it and it should go back to improving their living. So in that sense, workers are not asking for the impossible when they make a demand for higher wages. It is the politicians' wage that we need to look at. Today, members of the National Assembly, including executive, whether at the national and at the state level, are collecting tens of millions of naira. And for doing what? For doing a job that any one of us, any Nigerian with basic education can do. What does it take to be in the parliament? What does it take to be a local government chairman? So in that sense, why should political office holders earn than an average teacher? So those are the questions we should be asking.
Yes, the issue of accountability comes into question here. But then if the government and, of course, the labor representatives sit and decide to deliberate on this and are not able to reach a conclusion or an agreement, what do you think the most sensible and sustainable thing to do in seeing that the workers' plights are addressed and government is in a position to equally meet its financial obligations to its workers?
I think labor, when I say this, I'm referring to the NSC and TUC, must not quickly forget the experience of the minimum wage negotiation just about 4 years ago, which it was a negotiation that went on for so long, with the government and employers just dilly-dallying, because the interest was simply to just wear out Nigerian workers. I think that experience should be the starting point for leadership of the NSA and TUC today, to know that only through struggle can workers' demands for a better wage actually be won. And that is why they should not waste any time so much in the boardroom discussing and negotiating forever.
But
once it is clear that they are not prepared
for dialogue.
That is exactly what I'm saying. But dialogue is not, a journey to no destination. The experience of the last minimum wage negotiation was that the federal government and the state government made sure to pin down workers for over 9 months of negotiation going to nowhere. The only thing that made the government to reverse course and decide to agree to a figure was when the NSA and TUC began, to go on strike. And that is why I think that that experience should be the starting point of this new conversation. In fact, what I think the NSA and TUC should start with is a warning strike.
Okay.
So that the government can be aware of the potential power of the working class to shut down the economy if their demands are not met. And this is also essential to ensure that the government will not just come out with a ridiculous figure at the end of the day. How did they come up with 70,000 naira in the last negotiation? If you remember, the initial demand of the NSA and TUC was for 615,000 naira as at 2024. And this was not just a demand they made out of thin air. It was on the basis of the calculation of what actually goes into cost of living for an average Nigerian workers. And because they allowed the government to play them and to dribble them and through, long-winded negotiation going to nowhere, that was how they had to concede to a ridiculous amount of 70,000 naira.
Okay.
Something which has proven incapable of making lives better for anybody just 3 years after.
All right.
Workers must stick to that demand and be prepared to go to any length to ensure that the employers and the government, meet those demands.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Taiwo Azan Soweto, for sharing your thoughts with us about this discourse. Appreciate that.